The Biden administration, along with politicians on both sides of the aisle, want to ban TikTok for most Americans, claiming that it's a national security risk because of its so called ties to China. But according to a leaked government document obtained by independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, some U.S. officials will still get to use the app. Why? The State Department says that TikTok is too important for their work in public diplomacy, which basically means spreading U.S. propaganda to foreign audiences. This is where things get a little confusing or downright weird. On one hand, the White House says that TikTok is dangerous because of foreign influence. On the other hand, they're planning to keep using it for their own influence efforts. If TikTok is such a threat, why is it fine for the government to use? The document signed by Secretary of State Antony Blinken explains the loophole. Even though the law passed in 2022 bans TikTok on government devices, there's a rule allowing exceptions for national security. That's exactly what the State Department used to carve out a way to keep its officials and even its contractors on the app. The cable even points out how TikTok's popularity, especially with young people, makes it too useful for them to ignore. So while regular users are being told to switch to Instagram or YouTube to line the pockets of Meta shareholders, some of which are in Congress, the government gets to keep using TikTok because it helps them. At the same time, millions of Americans face losing a platform where they share ideas, generate income, and connect with other people. The hypocrisy is obvious. TikTok is too dangerous for us common folk, but safe enough for the government to use to spread its propaganda. The things I want to say about this will get me put on a watch list, so I'll just say that at the time of this video, the Supreme Court hasn't yet made a decision about whether the proposed TikTok ban will be upheld, struck down, or paused indefinitely. But as things stand, the government seems to think that free speech on TikTok isn't worth protecting unless they're the ones speaking. In a long-awaited move, the Biden administration is set to lift the U.S. designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism, according to reports. This change, expected to be formalized as early as next week, could mark a pivotal turning point for the resilient island nation whose economy and people have suffered decades of hardship under a U.S.-imposed embargo. This decision, first reintroduced in 2021, added another layer of sanctions on Cuba. For years, the embargo has blocked Cuba from accessing important medicines, international financial systems, restricted tourism, and cut off essential imports. Lifting this designation could provide a vital boost that the island needs. The designation's removal may open doors for travelers and companies to re-engage with Cuba. Before this designation, Cuba had seen a surge in tourism, with thousands of people flocking to Havana's vibrant streets and pristine beaches. Cruise ships docked there regularly, and direct flights to Cuba were easy to book. The label of state sponsor of terrorism restricted foreign investment, deterred airlines from expanding routes, and discouraged cruise lines from docking in Cuban ports. As a result, many Cubans have struggled with food shortages, limited healthcare supplies, and scarce access to essential goods. The U.S. embargo on Cuba, which began in the 1960s, has evolved over time into one of the longest-standing economic blockades in modern history. Though some restrictions were eased during the Obama administration, Donald Trump placed sanctions that reverse much of that progress. Despite the anticipated policy shift by the Biden administration, some experts caution that this reversal could be temporary, given President-elect Donald Trump's upcoming inauguration and the likely nomination of Senator Marco Rubio, an outspoken critic of Cuba, anti-communist war hawk, as Secretary of State. If the designation is lifted, this is a positive thing for the resilient island nation. But with 6 days left until Trump takes office, many wonder why the Biden administration didn't make this move sooner. A ceasefire deal has reportedly been reached, but as of now, it's unclear if both sides have officially signed it. This proposal looks similar to the one offered last year that never materialized. U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff reportedly had a tense meeting with Benjamin Netanyahu on Saturday. Witkoff pressed Netanyahu to make key compromises to finalize a deal before Trump's January 20th inauguration. Reportedly, Israel has agreed to fully withdraw from Gaza, including the Philadelphia corridor, with no troops or security zones left behind. Although the deal doesn't formally acknowledge Hamas's control, there's no plan for its removal either. Israel will allow released Palestinian prisoners to return to Gaza instead of exiling them. Additionally, Israel reportedly dropped its demand for a list of live hostages and agreed to take back dead bodies as part of the first stage. Last year, Netanyahu declared many of these things off limits, but now he faces increasing pressure after suffering setbacks from Palestinian resistance factions. Under this deal, Gaza residents could return to northern Gaza with minimal Israeli security checks. The agreement includes releasing 33 Israeli hostages in exchange for 1,000 Palestinian prisoners, many of whom are minors, elderly, or in poor health. A temporary 6-week ceasefire is planned, with further negotiations during that period to arrange more exchanges and discuss the end of this. Officials are racing to finalize the agreement before Trump's inauguration on January 20th. But even with this potential ceasefire, the damage and suffering in Gaza remain overwhelming. Over 46,000 people have been killed, and most of Gaza's population has been displaced, and aid is still not reaching many of those in urgent need. Entire families have been wiped out, and many are struggling to survive without food, water, or medicine. I'll keep you guys posted with more details details about this potential ceasefire as they emerge.